do with it. So in a culture of red tape, pay raises, and politics as usual, why would they come here? That's when Hickenlooper started to change. He made some progress. We need to go on forward. And one thing I'll do is make sure I'll get on that plane. And I'll go to Mr. and Mrs. IKEA in Stockholm, and I'll say, hey, we want that next door. We want to have it in Denver. And I'll think through how to make this work, because we can't have 600,000 people living here and shopping in the Costco in Aurora. It's just not going to work. So we have to figure out how to make it work, and we have to have somebody with some private sector experience to make sure the numbers add up. We can pull out a calculator and look across the table with the developer and say, hey, we can make this work, but you're asking for too much.
So this is not my first trip to the rodeo. Even without a strategy, I was successful in working with Forest Cities to attract Bass Pro to Denver, Colorado. And I was successful in helping to attract Targets to the Northfield Mall. That was the first project I did on City Council, a $200 million infrastructure project, TIP project. And we were able to successfully attract Bass Pro as its anchor. And so this is not new. What I'm saying to you now is that we simply need to have a strategy for the entire city. I was able to do it in my district. No, we didn't get IKEA, but we bought Bass Pro. And I challenge you to go there on Saturday and look at the cars that have license plates from Wyoming, Kansas City, Missouri, who drive in to shop at our Bass Pro to leave their sales tax dollars right here. So that's several $100 million worth of economic impact right here in our city that we did it without a retail strategy. And so as mayor, I recognize that we need to be able to bring that kind of strategy throughout the rest of the city. And I'm looking forward to doing that in partnership with our economic partners.
Let me ask a related question to Craig's good point there. Facts are facts. Denver is now down to one Fortune 500 company, DaVita, which, as you know, is number 359 on the list. That puts us behind such thriving cities as El Dorado, Arkansas. So, you know, I ask you, as part of this equation, and the more specific question of can you do a better job than John Hickenlooper of attracting Fortune 500 companies to Denver, and if so, how? Let me throw into the question, guys, this. Denver is now regarded widely within the marijuana industry as the marijuana capital of America. Do you think that reputation and the presence of these neon green crosses all over Denver helps or hurts the ability to attract top businesses and young families to Denver?
You know, first of all, let me just say we should never abandon our efforts to attract Fortune 500 companies to Denver. And I have helped recruit Fortune 500 companies to Denver. I've helped bring Prologis to Denver, Colorado. And it breaks my heart that they're leaving, or at least their corporate headquarters is going to San Francisco. But we know why. Because they need that nonstop flight to Asia. And no person on city council or in the mayor's office has worked as hard as I have to land that nonstop flight from Denver to Tokyo, Japan. I've been over there 4 or 5 times working to negotiate that deal, and we're #1. When the 787 is done testing, we're #1 on the list for the next destination for nonstop flights. So we got to finish that deal. So let me say this very quickly. Never abandon it. But let me give you a sports analogy. Any Denver Nugget fans in the room? So I hope you celebrated like I did when Carmelo was traded. Okay? But let me tell you why. And I look at Carmelo as an example of the Fortune 500 company. When what Carmelo's removal did was to expose the fact that we didn't have a bench. There was no depth to our bench. So when they brought in the 3 players that came from the New York Knickerbockers, what that did for us was to create a bench. Carmelo represents our Fortune 500 company. The bench are our small businesses that we have to do a better job in growing in Denver, Colorado. We got to do a better job in rooting them here. We got to do a better job in nurturing them here. And so when those 3 players came here, what they did was, they're arguably not as big as Carmelo. There are small businesses. But when one person couldn't make the play anymore because he was hurt or he came off the court, the bench covered for him. And that's what we have to do first, is to create a system. And as mayor, I'm looking forward to creating that environment and working with entrepreneurs to root businesses here in Denver. The city of Portland gets it. The cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul get it. They grow their own. And so during the economy, the recession, they stayed like this in job sustainability. Folks, it's time to create a more sustainable economic system. We do it by growing our small businesses first, in partnership or at the same time, parallel, of working to attract bigger companies, the Fortune 500s with emerging economies, our industries.
The first thing we need to do is stop losing them. If you're in a hole, the first thing you want to do is stop digging. So we need to make sure that we hug those that are left. I guess we're down to one. Probably better than one. And the next thing we need to do is to figure out how to truly grow small businesses. And we've talked a lot about this, because when you actually talk to small business people, all they talk about is the red tape in City Hall. And I don't know if any of you have ever pulled a permit. Like Denon Moore, who all she wanted to do is continue to hire people for the 20 people that she put back to work in the toughest recession. She got little to no helping hand from City Hall. So what you need first is a group of people who actually understand business, so therefore it might have been good that you did some time working in business. That's an important attribute. It certainly served Mayor Hickenlooper well to know what it means. What does EBITDA mean? What does earnings with and without depreciation mean? How does it work? What is a 10Q? Those are things that you know what they are. You can sit down with a CEO and figure it out. Those are good things to know if you want to recruit businesses. The next thing you need to know how to do is figure out what makes them tick. And what makes them tick, and we talked to Kent Theory, who came here. And by the way, he was not as impressed with our recruitment strategy as was Dallas and Nashville. But what made him come here was some of the unique investments that we made, particularly into our fast track system. The commitment and the investments that we were making, both into our community, were important to DeVito. And one of the most important things, and I say this all the time, we need to stop marketing 300 Days of Sunshine. This has to be a community that is hard stop, as business friendly as Dallas, and as green as Portland. We get those two things right, and nobody can touch us.
Before you start, we'll give extra time for this, and I don't mean to be overly persistent, but I didn't hear anything about marijuana.
I was just going to get there in my rebuttal. Denver has led the nation in creating regulations around this medical marijuana industry. Before the City Council began to debate the medical marijuana issue, a couple of our council members went to Los Angeles, who had been looking at this for 4 years, and we thought they would be our model. It turns out that only after we adopted our regulations did they adopt theirs, and used our model as their blueprint. So we've led the nation in regulating it. And I can tell you that what the Colorado voters passed was not what we're seeing, the retail dispensaries on the street. But since they were here, and business investment had occurred, regulations were built to allow for us to regulate them and to begin to kind of allow the market to take control, but to allow them to operate with a balance between what the communities and neighborhoods expected and wanted, as well as given access by the patients who needed it. I'll be the first to tell you, people are exploiting the loopholes, people are getting their cards. We know that with all of the 40,000 people who have cards, probably less than half of them are medically need the cards. So we know we got work to do, but it's going to be an ongoing process. And no, we don't want to become the medical marijuana capital of the nation. That's not our identity. That's not how we do things in Denver.
Chris, may I follow up briefly with you, Senator, as well? And this reputation of being the medical, or just the marijuana capital of America right now, do you think it helps or hurt Denver attract business and young families?
I think there are parts of it that need to get cleaned up, particularly some of the signage, particularly the people on street corners. And I was very clear to Norma, when we showed up at their convention here, that industry better regulate itself. Because we created a regime under which the voters of Denver can choose to ban the dispensary model. So at some point, if they don't learn to clean it up, if we don't learn to get out some padlocks and shut down those that are abusing the system, we're going to basically end up putting it back on the ballot to say, hey, we didn't vote for this, and you've been unable and unwilling as an industry to clean it up. So what we did in the legislature was to create the ultimate local control bill, because that's exactly what the city's told us to do. Let us do the zoning, and let us effectively regulate this on zoning. You guys create the regime, and then you let us opt out if we don't like this. And individual cities have been going up and down. Some have voted it, some have kept it, some have banned it. That's what's supposed to happen. It's in the Constitution, so we have to deal with it. But I do think we need to get it cleaned up, and that'll start on July the 1st.
obviously Denver is predominantly Democratic. That's the party of choice. But there are GOP citizens, unaffiliated citizens. Who should they vote for? Are you conservative in any way on any issue? And what are the, I want you to say 3 nice things about the GOP.
I looked at my wife and say, look at her and say, am I concerned about anything? She knows when it comes to money, I'm very conservative. She said. So let me just say this. You know, one day I was sitting there thinking, and I never thought about this. First of all, City Council, the City of Denver, is nonpartisan. So we did not come up in a bipartisan environment. We have to, and we do, work together. The very first piece of legislation that I passed on City Council was done in partnership with Councilwoman Jean Fox. She and I collaborated on an administrative citation process in the City and County of Denver. We've saved the city tens of thousands of dollars through the process that she and I came up with very early on in our administrations on council. And then I looked up one day and I noticed that my campaign chairman, Bruce James, Republican, my campaign finance chair, Pat Hamlin, Republican. This was not by design, by the way. I just got endorsed today by Don Bain, who's endorsing my candidacy. Don Barasica, former Director of Economic Development for the state of Colorado, endorsed me. Frances Owens, former First Lady of Colorado, endorsed me. So I believe that as people look at the policies that I firmly believe in, that they will find, and that I put up on my website, it was those policies, it was discussions of moderate approach to leadership, to policy in this city, fiscal issues that attracted them. I didn't win these over because I looked good. I won them over because I talked about policies that they cared about in this city. So, you know, I think the Republican Party has been tremendous stewards in this city. They bring a balanced conversation, which we should always have about every issue in this city. And they support me. That's 3 things. And some of them. Oh, and Christy Faraci is one of my endorsers too, as well. Republican.
You know, I'm a fiscal conservative, and I promise never to vote for pay raise for myself. I want to also be clear, because it's politics as usual, and that's what a lot of Republicans hate. By the way, it's, by the way, what a lot of Democrats hate too. It adds to the cynicism of what we do. The second issue is I am committed to make sure the numbers in government add up, and we're going to have some tough choices. One of the reasons I've called, I've been very specific, and I've been waiting for Councilman Hancock to be this specific about how to fix the budget deficit, is I very quickly dived in on Denver Water. Denver Water is one of these enterprises that always does just fine while the general fund does poorly. The people at Denver Water do not contribute to their own pension fund. So an environment where all of our 401ks have become 101ks, not only do we pay in our water rates for their employment, they do not pay for any of their retirement. Now that's the kind of stuff that drives me as a fiscal conservative crazy. And as mayor, I'm going to change it. Because it's not fair for the city and county workers to take 5 furlough days and for Denver Water to take 0. So these are the things and the questions I ask. And yep, I break a little china, I ruffle some feathers, because it's wrong. It's keeping us from doing things we should do, just like the pay raises. Just like when Hickenlooper said to Council no, and Councilman Hancock and the rest, in politics as usual, overrode his veto to give a pay raise, and then promised another pay raise for next year. How do you promise a pay raise for employees for next year with a $100 million budget deficit? I don't think Republicans are going to buy that kind of politics as usual. So let me be clear. The things I like about you is you really believe in the value of integrity. You really understand the word of fiscal integrity. And you, like me, are horrified for the first time in our history that our own federal government is on a credit watch to lose our AAA bond rating. That upsets me, and it should upset you too.
Let me once again say very clearly, because this is a difference between us. I mean, you can talk about it, Chris. Like I said, while we were doing the people's work, and we were correcting the structural imbalance for CSA employees And by the way, I want you to know that the raises for elected officials is what we're required to do by law. We froze it for 2 years. And what we did was to make sure they didn't go into effect till 2014. And we made sure that you had them, that they were in place, not for me. And if you had paid attention while you were at the state legislature, you would know it's the state law where elected officials cannot give themselves raises. We set it for the next slate of officers. That's state law. So the commercial is factually incorrect. It is wrong. I did not give myself a raise. I, number one, will not be on the new city council. I've already stated very clearly that I will not accept the raise when elected mayor. And so I want you to be very clear. If we had not set them, it would be a total of 8 years. And you think that 2-year catch-up or 6-year catch-up was one thing. If by law we had to catch up after 8 years, then everybody would be talking about it. The reality is we did honor the fact that the recession was in play, that we did everything we could to make sure we honor that and delayed the raises frozen for an additional 2 years.
This question goes first to Senator Romer. What grade would you give the Denver Police Department? And if you could change one thing and one thing only about the Denver Police Department, what would it be?
I'm going to speak about it first. 98% of those officers who put that badge on were there to serve and protect. They're great people. And they work very hard, and it's great to watch them protect us every day. There's a small percentage of them that need to get out of that force. And unfortunately, we've had a system that just doesn't work. We haven't had an ability to get clarity, so we need 3 things. We need a leadership change. We need a new police chief. We need transparency. We absolutely need to understand the discipline process. The community needs to not be held in the dark for 2 years and goes forward. Third thing is we need training. We need better training. When you look at that Booker tape and you look at the use of that chokehold, that clearly was a failure in training. So those are 3 things we need to go forward with. Is we need to make sure that we understand how to make sure we have a change of leadership, transparency, and better training. With those issues in place, I'd give them a B-. I'd give them a B- because so many of them work so hard, so many of them want to do better, so many of them have to do this. There's a very small portion. I wouldn't even give them an F. They ought to be out of there. They ought to be out of there as quickly as we can root them out. So that's what we need to do. We need to make sure and restore the trust between the police department and the public. And that's why it's so important to bring in a new police chief. It's also why I've decided, and I think it's correct, that we need to have the willingness to go out and do a search nationally. We need to let local people also apply for it. But I'm not going to promise anybody to be a police chief without knowing that we have the best and right to do this. Because ultimately, we need a culture change. And that's where we'll go back from a B- to a solid A. We deserve a department, and they want an A too. And we can get it under my leadership.
Then I would give the police department a solid B, and I really believe, and I met with about 100 police officers just the other day, and we had a very candid conversation. And they asked me, well, how do I feel about police officers? And I'll tell you, I have ridden with the police officers every year since I've been on city council. Actually, before them, I made sure that I spent at least an entire shift with the police officers. And by the way, if you're looking for some fun on a Friday night, do the late night shift with the police department. Go for a ride. You're going to see some amazing things about your city and about the police officers. But I believe that 99% of our police officers are men and women very dedicated to really 2 objectives: to serve and protect and to get home safely. And they carry out their responsibilities very honorably. We do have those who step over the line. The same thing I told them is that the number 1 thing I would change is their culture. That I believe they have a culture that doesn't really serve their profession very well. And it is simply a culture of protectionism, to protect one another. And I understand that. It's a natural response because that's what they do on the street, is to back one another up. But let me say this to you. I have helped to bring national best practices to the independent monitor's office. I helped to bring the civilian oversight board. I helped to bring national best practice to our discipline process. So we did away with the comparable discipline, and now we have the discipline matrix in place. I set on all 3 of those commissions to help design them and implement best practices here in Denver. The very next step for us is to transform and bring national best practice to our Internal Affairs Bureau, so that citizens who come in with complaints don't hit a stone wall, and we have effective follow-up on complaints. I think that's extremely important, and really the first step to transforming the culture of the police department.
I met with those same 150 officers, and I was walking out, that same question, hey, it sounds like you're asking for us to share some sacrifice. I said, yep, it's going to be pretty hard. And I have to look at a lot of things, because they asked me about the drop program, all kinds of other things they're going to work through. Same thing, they said, hey, how are you going to ask us to sacrifice? How are you going to ask us to be willing to look at our contract with City Council just voting themselves to pay raise? Folks, it's going to be hard. It's really hard. It's really hard when already we promised a pay raise for the city employees for next year. Because how can you vote yourself a pay raise and then not also promise a pay raise for everybody else, even though we're $100 million upside down? The funny thing is, the line troops get it. They understand and they're ready. But they want it to be equitable. They want to be fair. They want people to lead by example. They do not want politics as usual. They want leadership.
Councilman, let me start with you. We all observed what occurred in Madison, Wisconsin, and it centered around the right of government employees to collectively bargain. As you watch the events unfold in Wisconsin, and you being part of the government, what were your thoughts, and do you support more or less collective bargaining rights for government employees?
We have 3 collective bargaining units in Denver, Colorado, Craig, and I support their right to collectively bargain. The police, sheriffs, and fire departments all have the right to collectively bargain. In light of where we are today, as a city, as an economy, and as a nation, I've been very clear with the unions. It's why I did not receive their endorsements, that I do not support expanding collective bargaining to the other 9,000 city employees. I want to be clear that as a mayor and as a member of city council, I have worked diligently, as has Mayor Hickenlooper and other members of city council, to protect and to honor city employees, and to make sure that, one, they have competitive wages, make sure they have competitive benefits, and we have, by the